The 3 valleys they flooded were not empty. That's what the survey notes say, if you read them carefully enough, and most people never do. I found them in a regional archive in 2021, filed under a heading that had nothing to do with what they contained. I was looking for something else entirely. What stopped me was a single line in a 1929 geological assessment. 4 words describing what the survey team encountered on the valley floors of the central Ozark Plateau. 4 words the rest of the report did not explain, did not expand on, and did not return to. I have been trying to explain them ever since. The reservoir system that covers the southern Missouri Ozarks was not built all at once. It came in phases, roughly 3 decades, beginning with the Banel Dam authorization in 1924 and concluding with Bull Shoals in 1952. The Army Corps of Engineers managed most of it. The stated purposes were consistent: flood control, hydroelectric generation, recreational development. These were legitimate needs. The White River flooded badly and repeatedly. The region was poor. The infrastructure produced still functions today. None of that is in dispute. What receives considerably less attention is the scale of what was submerged. Lake of the Ozarks alone flooded approximately 65,000 acres of valley floor. Table Rock Lake covered another 43,100. Norfolk, Bull Shoals, Norfolk, Taneycomo. Together, the system drowned somewhere in the range of 250,000 acres of Ozark Valley terrain. Dozens of named communities, several hundred miles of road, an unknown number of cemeteries. The complete pre-inundation surface of valleys inhabited continuously since at least the early 1800s. The Army Corps relocated residents. It compensated landowners. It moved what could be moved. It did not excavate. This is the detail the official record handles carefully and briefly. The pre-inundation surveys conducted between 1929 and the mid-1950s were hydrological instruments. They concerned water volume, dam placement, sediment dynamics, structural geology of the valley walls, not archaeology. There was no federal mandate requiring systematic ground investigation before reservoir creation in this period. Some counties conducted informal surface-level assessments. A few produced written records, most did not. The Army Corps survey from 1929 is 73 pages long. I found it in the Missouri State Archives, filed under engineering project documentation rather than historical records. The majority is hydrology. Page 41 contains the passage that stopped me. It is part of the pre-inundation survey section. It describes conditions at the base of one of the valley floors in what is now the northern arm of Lake of the Ozarks. The language is spare. The survey team describes the valley floor as exhibiting what the document calls anomalous substrate irregularities, consistent with prior significant disturbance. They note exposed limestone formations at approximately 14 feet below current grade, formations which appear, in the report's words, not consistent with natural weathering patterns for the region. 2 sentences, no follow-up. Page 42 begins sediment load calculations. The phrase "not consistent with natural weathering patterns" is how a geologist describes rock that looks worked. Not necessarily cut, not necessarily shaped with intention, but altered in ways that natural erosion does not typically produce. The 1929 survey team were not archaeologists. They may not have known what they were looking at. It is equally possible they knew precisely what they were looking at, and had no professional framework for including it in a hydrological report. Both explanations are consistent with the record. What the record does not explain is why no one followed up. Not in 1929, not during the subsequent survey phases, not before the gates closed and the Osage River began, slowly, to become a lake. The valley floors of the Ozark Plateau are older landscapes than they appear. The plateau is a dissected tableland. Rivers have been cutting downward through limestone for millions of years, producing the steep-walled hollows and narrow valley floors that define the region. Where the cutting stopped and sediment accumulated, surface conditions can be preserved across extraordinary spans of time. What sits beneath the agricultural layer of the 19th century in an Ozark Valley may represent accumulation that no surface survey can easily characterize. The towns are documented. Linn Creek, the original county seat of Camden County, was relocated before the Banel Dam filled. Residents were given time, records transferred, the post office moved, the courthouse relocated. What Linn Creek's residents left behind, beyond the physical structures now sitting under 60 feet of water, was the ground beneath those structures. Ground that had been the floor of that valley for longer than the town had existed. Ground that no one in the window between the authorization and the flooding systematically examined. The 1929 survey notes the anomaly once and moves on. The reservoir filled on schedule. Whatever the survey team encountered on page 41 is still there, at the bottom of the northern arm of Lake of the Ozarks, under 60 feet of water and 9 decades of accumulated lake sediment. The official record accounts for the towns. It does not account for what was under them. The excavation record for the Ozark region in the 19th century was never meant to be comprehensive. What exists is scattered. County newspaper accounts, correspondence between amateur naturalists and Eastern institutions, brief entries in state geological survey reports, and a small number of formal accession records held at the Smithsonian Institution's Division of Physical Anthropology. Read separately, each document is an oddity. Read in sequence, they describe a pattern that none of them acknowledges, and none of them appears to recognize in the others. The earliest account I have found comes from the Benton County Observer, published in Warsaw, Missouri, September 1877. The item is 8 lines long, positioned between a land transaction notice and a report on the full wheat crop. It describes the discovery, during well digging on a property in the Osage River Valley, of what the paper calls bones of unusual character and great size. The property owner is named. Depth of discovery, approximately 11 feet below grade. 2 local men with medical training examined the remains. Both agreed they were human. The paper does not speculate. It does not return to the subject. I checked subsequent issues through 1878. No follow-up items. The property is now under the Harry S. Truman Reservoir, completed 1979. The original land record exists in the Camden County Historical Archive. The well is not marked on it, not mentioned, not mapped, not followed up. In 1884, the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology published its 2nd annual report. Appendix B summarizes skeletal material received from field correspondents during the preceding 2 years. Item 41 reads, Human skeletal remains, multiple individuals, recovered from alluvial deposit, Ozark region, Missouri, donor correspondence on file, material transferred to physical anthropology collection, catalogue reference OH-1884-41. 11 words shorter than the average entry in the same appendix. No county given, no donor named. The catalogue reference, OH-1884-41, does not appear in the Smithsonian's publicly accessible accession database. I submitted a research inquiry to the National Anthropological Archives in 2022. The response confirmed the annual report entry exists. It could not confirm the location of the material. Not transferred to another institution, not destroyed in any documented event, not reclassified under a different reference number, as far as the archivist could determine, simply not locatable. In 1891, the Missouri State Geological Survey published a report on the karst topography of the central Ozark Plateau. Its author, a geologist named Broadhead who had been conducting regional surveys since the 1870s, includes one paragraph describing a probe excavation near the confluence of the Niangua and Osage Rivers, a location now also under the Harry S. Truman Reservoir. Broadhead describes valley floor sediment containing, at 8 to 13 feet of depth, a layer of what he terms calcified organic material of indeterminate origin and a typical scale. He notes the material did not conform to the typical bone assemblage of deer, bear, and bison, remains common in Ozark cave and alluvial deposits. He does not elaborate. The paragraph ends. The report continues with spring systems. Broadhead's correspondence is held at the University of Missouri. I reviewed the relevant letters from 1890 and 1891. No letter discusses the Niangua Osage find with any colleague. No letter requests a second opinion. One letter, dated March 1891, addressed to a contact at the Peabody Museum at Harvard, mentions having encountered material warranting further examination during his Central Ozark survey, and asks whether the Peabody has interest in receiving specimens. The Peabody's reply, if one exists, is not in the collection. 3 locations. 3 independent documentary trails: Warsaw, 1877, the unnamed Ozark site, 1884 Smithsonian intake, the Niangua Osage confluence, 1891, different observers, different language, different institutions, each involving material recovered from valley floor sediment at a depth of between 8 and 14 feet. each resulting in either institutional transfer without traceable outcome or silence. When you collect all the footnotes from documents that were never meant to speak to each other, the same depth keeps appearing, the same valley type, the same sequence, brief notation, transfer or non-transfer, nothing. Is this suppression? Not the dramatic kind, not fires in federal buildings, not authorized destruction orders, not congressional defunding, though all of those things happened in adjacent contexts and we will return to them. What this looks like is the ordinary kind, the kind that requires no orders. Material gets lost when no institution decides it is important enough to track carefully, and when the people who found it lack the standing to insist otherwise. Not one complete skeleton, not one published measurement, not one confirmed photograph in any archive I've been able to locate. Gone. The Banyal Dam authorization was signed in 1924. The Harry S. Truman Dam authorization was approved by Congress in 1954. Between those two dates, the 30-year window in which the major Ozark reservoir system was planned, authorized, and substantially built, the volume of published material describing anomalous finds in the valley floors of the central Ozark Plateau reaches its highest concentration, then stops. Not because the valleys had been excavated, because they had been filled. This is not an accusation, it is a sequence. The 1877 newspaper item, the 1884 Smithsonian intake, Broadhead's 1891 geological note, these fall in the decades before reservoir planning began. Additional items follow. In 1903, the Camden County Republican carried a brief report of skeletal remains encountered during road construction near the Osage River, described by the county surveyor as being of notable proportions. In 1911, a letter from a Camden County schoolteacher named Harmon, held in the State Historical Society of Missouri, filed under miscellaneous correspondence, describes finding what he calls a great quantity of old bones in a creek bank exposure near Max Creek, and mentions his intention to write to the university. No record of a university response exists. No follow-up letter from Harmon exists. In 1919, the Missouri State Board of Health published a county-by-county survey of rural well conditions. Camden County's entry notes, as an incidental observation, that several property owners in the Osage River Valley had reported encountering hardened organic deposits at depths between 9 and 15 feet during well drilling. The Board of Health had no mandate to investigate such deposits. One sentence, the report moves on. By 1924, no institution had produced a systematic account of what the Osage River Valley floor contained. No university had excavated. No museum had funded a survey. The documentation existed only in scattered pieces. A newspaper here, a letter there, a footnote in a geological report. None of it ever assembled, none of it treated as a coherent body of evidence. Not unknown, not undocumented. Documented in pieces by people who were not archaeologists, in publications no coordinating institution had ever collected. This is the condition the valley floors were in when the water came. There is one account that postdates the reservoir construction. It comes from a woman I will identify only as Vera, because her full name appears in a single document held in a county historical society archive, whose catalogue does not index it under any searchable subject heading. She was born in 1901 in a farmhouse in the valley now under the Harry S. Truman Reservoir. Her family was among those relocated before the flooding in the late 1970s. In 1981, 2 years after the reservoir reached full pool, she gave a recorded interview to a local historian documenting displaced families. The recording is held in the Western Historical Manuscript Collection at the University of Missouri-Columbia. It is 47 minutes long. Most of it concerns the relocation, the paperwork, the payment, the difficulty of watching the house go under. Near the end, the interviewer asks whether her family had ever found anything unusual on the property. Vera pauses before answering. She says her father, when she was perhaps 8 or 9, which places the memory around 1909 or 1910, had been digging a drainage channel at the low end of the pasture close to the river when he encountered something that stopped him. He came inside. He told her mother he needed the wagon. He spent the rest of that afternoon moving what he'd found to a spot further up the hill, above the flood line. She never saw what it was. Her father told the children only that it was old, that it was not theirs to disturb, and that they were not to dig in that part of the pasture again. She does not say what he found. The interviewer does not press. The recording ends 7 minutes later. What Vera's father moved up the hill in 1909 or 1910 is now, if it remained where he placed it, somewhere above the high water line of the Truman Reservoir, on land acquired by the federal government as part of the reservoir project area, not publicly accessible. The Western Historical Manuscript Collection confirmed the recording exists and is available for on-site listening. They could not tell me whether anyone else had ever requested it. You cannot excavate a lake bed. Not a metaphor, a physical constraint. The valley floors of the Ozark Plateau, where sediment accumulated over centuries, where at depths between 8 and 15 feet something was being found repeatedly from the 1850s through the first decade of the 20th century, are now under between 40 and 110 feet of water, beneath decades of post-inundation sedimentation. The pre-inundation surface is not accessible. It will not become accessible. What the archive holds is the record of a window, roughly 1850 to 1920, the period when the valley floors were actively broken by wells, drainage projects, road cuts, and small-scale farming, produced a scattered, uncoordinated, institutionally neglected body of documentation. Something in those valley floors, never adequately investigated. Then the water came. The window closed. In the drought of 2012, reservoir levels dropped significantly across the system. There were reports, informal, unverified, circulated in local online forums rather than any institutional document, of unusual stone formations briefly visible on the exposed valley margins. No photographs survived in any form I have been able to locate. The water came back. The formations, if they were there, went under again. They are still there now.